climate itself is open to foreign investment. One company, Caterpillar, came here 13 years ago. It was the Colorado Wagner families founded Caterpillar, in effect, Mongolia, and parts of Russia, which they spun off. And they now are at $250 million in revenue. And it's 100% owned by the Wagner family, or by Wagner Colorado. This is called Wagner Asia. It's an indication, though. Another one, our chairman, is a German. He partnered with an American lawyer who married a Mongolian woman, and the three of them own Mongolian Star Melchers, which they started in 1997. Now they not only have Mercedes, but they have a strong mining supply business with a lot of good distribution for Bort Longyear and many others, and a personal products division which the woman runs with Pampers and things like that. And EBRD made them alone. They built a great new plant, which you'll see just before you get to the airport on the north side, the right side of the road as you leave. An indication of what you can do here. And those three people own 100% of it. The key, though, with a lot of money coming into the country, as I point out, in effect, one way to look at what's come in is that with a small GDP of about $6 billion, OT is putting $6 billion on top of that, or into the country. So you talk about trying to prime the pump. I mean, I think in the U.S., they might have spent maybe 2% of the GDP in the first two primers, and maybe there'll be a third. Obama was speaking yesterday about doing some stuff. And China spent about 4% of GDP. Mongolia is 100% coming in from just OT, and it's basically free. It's amazing. And that really has opened the floodgates, their agreement, for a lot of other agreements. And you've heard about Talon to avoid it. There are many others, and we look forward to Gotcha, and his Borosher was a success. Property rights are respected, very liberal ownership regime. All the banks are private, except for one which had to be set up as a bridge bank when two banks were liquidated a couple of years ago, about a year ago. And that will be reprivatized, or privatized within a year or two. Rights to property are recognized in Mongolian law. All transactions, such as salaries here, are paid in Mongolian togar, which is not convertible anywhere else in the world, but anyway, it's kind of an interesting phenomenon. We used to be paid in dollars, but no longer we're paid in togar.
So yeah, our entire future depends on that, coal washery and the rail. Those two things really are what we need to make this thing work. If we have to continue using trucking at full production, our annual trucking bill will be $475 million a year just for trucking to the border. Now, if we have rail, that should cost us less than $100 million a year. So that's $300 million a year almost, directly to the bottom line, just because of the trucking versus rail issue. The coal washery, for every month we delay, costs us $20 million in revenue. $20 million a month is what we're losing because we don't have a coal washery. So these things are absolutely fundamental to the future of this project. And if you look at this issue of rail versus road, we're a state-owned enterprise. We'll be 51% owned by the government. When you take it, it's $300 million to the bottom line. Okay, 30% of that's roughly tax, and then the government's getting 51% of the difference because it's going to be dividend. The state's missing out. Will be missing out on $190 million a year in government revenue by not allowing us to have a rail. This is crazy. So, these things need to be better understood at a policy level. They're not particularly well understood at this point in time, and we are working hard to articulate it so that they do become better understood.
Is there a way we can educate the public about this so that maybe there's more pressure on government, about railway and so on?
Well, I must say I'm pretty optimistic that we are going to get a commencement of the rail development within the next couple of months. So, I'm pretty sure we're through that long period where we had this standoff and not with the minister not wanting to grant rail to the south. You know, one of the things that I mentioned to you that we have 80% of our coals going to Chelco, and we're actually discussing with another Chinese off-taker at the moment to take the other 20%, and therefore 100% of our coal is going to be going to China. If the government insists on building a railroad to the northeast, we ain't going to use it. Who is? Right? So the rail south is the one that makes sense, and it's the one that needs to be built. It needs to be done now.
Our key legislative working group, which is co-chaired by Jay Liotta, who you'll hear from shortly, believes that the new Strategic Enterprises Foreign Investment Law, CBIL, delivers an uncertain and negative message to investors. Our member, Michael Aldrich of Hogan Lovells, recently commented, "The law says invest in Mongolia, but follow these vague rules, or you'll be punished," quote unquote. We've been requested by key Mongolian entities that are members to prepare a first draft of an, quote, investment support law, which could mitigate some of the negatives of the CBIL. And I'll outline it before I finish. CBIL's lack of clarity affects the banks. That's the biggest sector, in a way, after mining. No one is sure how the CBIL will affect the largest banks in particular, who may all want to get IPO funding when the market turns in the next year or two. By the way, in terms of the legislative area in banking, capital adequacy ratios are being stepped up over the next 18 months. Two things are happening. First, banks are required to increase total capital. Second, to put more focus on Tier 1 capital, which is equity. Mongo Bank gets credit for dampening inflation in spite of these cash handouts of this year, and definitely for managing the foreign exchange rate, although it's picking up a little bit in the last week. A couple general comments on foreign capital, which is so needed for Mongolia's growth. It doesn't like uncertainty or instability. Such factors might make the huge IPO for Tadmon Tolgoi very difficult to be completed successfully, which would have serious budget implications for Mongolia. Attempts to change international contracts, such as the OT investment agreement, could seriously damage Mongolia's third neighbor policy, which has been a masterpiece of foreign affairs over the last 20 years. Mongolia depended on just its two big neighbors. Now let me conclude with an overview of this new investment law, which, as I said, could mitigate some of the negatives of CBIL.
OT, though, is very firm on the fact that they have a binding agreement. The government has 34% free. The government has received $750 million already. Nothing's come out of the ground. They're going to get between 50 and 70% of total cash out of the project for the foreseeable 50 years plus, the way it is. So we'll see what happens, but we could have a rocky time for the next 6 months or so. The other resource nationalist became minister of a new ministry called the Economic Development, I think it is, or Economic Development Ministry. He is really, he again was for renegotiating the OT agreement. He started what's called the windfall profits tax, which came in 2007 and drove gold into smuggling, and they stopped production, and they finally repealed that very case. So here he is again. The good news is that his deputy was chairman of Mongo Bank and is very pro-foreign direct investment. So that might temper the sky a little bit. We'll see. But unfortunately, this new law, which Jay probably talked about, this foreign investment law, Strategic Enterprise Foreign Investment Law, CBIL, is going to be regulated by this ministry. They're shifting the agency into it. Hardly any people have come across. The regs haven't been drafted. but it's in this ministry. They've also put into the ministry about a 90-person think tank, which is a very strong, it's the government think tank, run by a doctor, Mongolian, but who's educated in Japan.
Намайг ач тэрхэн гэдэг MICC брокер дийлгэн компани үүсгэн байгуулсан. 2005 оноос хойш манай үйл ажиллагаа явуулсан. Хөрөнгөний зах зээл дээр брокер дийлгэн хөрөнгө оруулалтын зөвлөгөөний үйлчилгээ зөвлөх үйлчилгээ үзүүлдэг. Манай харилцагч болохоор Монголын томоохон компаниуд бас хөрөнгө оруулалтыг тодорхой хүмүүс тэгээд хөрөнгө оруулалтын компаниуд сангууд байдаг л та. Бид болохоор одоо Монголын зээл дээр ажиллагаас гадна бас саяхнаас Европ офсныг Европоос хөрөнгө оруулалт татах Монголыг таниулах зорилгоор ажиллаж байгаа. Би өнөөдөр яг сэдв болоод юуны хөрөнгө оруулалт явуулж байна. Би презентацийг бэлдээгүй. Зүгээр таахан өөрийн бодлоо үнэлтэд хэлээд асуулт явуулах. Ер нь бол ихтэй жиж байгаа хөрөнгө оруулалтын орчин бодлого сайн биш байгаа. Юунаас харцлахгүй хөрөнгө оруулалтын Монгол улсад шууд орж иж байгаа шууд хөрөнгө оруулалт гэж ярьдаг шүү дээ. Тэр бол одоо 46% буурсан гэсэн статистик тоо байгаа. 12 харьцуулбал. Тэгээ ер нь бол 2006 оноос хойш харах юм бол хөрөнгө оруулалт жилдээ 100 сая төгрөг доллар байж байгаа. Яг 10 бараг хэдэн тэрбум доллар 3-4 тэрбум доллар гарчихсан. Тэгээ одоо буурлаад гэсэн бас тодорхой хэмжээний 2 тэрбум ч юм уу тий бас хангалттай орж байгаа төлөвлөлт орж ирж байгаа батн маш удаашрсан. Дараа жилийн үед бас их тоо цаашаа буурах боломжтой байна. Тэгээд гадаадын хөрөнгө оруулалтын Монголд юугаараа чухал байдаг юу ажлын байр нэмэгдүүлдэг гэж боддог. Тэгээд дээрээс нь одоо Монгол улсад их хэмжээний гадаад баялаг орж ирж тийм шууд хөрөнгө оруулалт хэлбэрээр орж ирсэн төгрөгийн хангалттай доктортой байна. Доллар зах зээл дээр илбэг багцсан. Долларын хангалттай гэсэн үг шүү дээ. Тэгэхээр гадаадын хөрөнгө оруулалт сайжруулах хэрэгтэй.
Today we're going to talk about this Quality Supply Development Center. But before I do that, I just want to talk a little bit about the Business Plus initiative. This is a USAID finance development program in Mongolia that basically have two components. One component is to improve the business enabling environment in the country, and the second component is to support private sector growth and competitiveness. In terms of the business enabling environment, BPI has been very busy over the last few months working both with the government of Mongolia and the private sector in Mongolia to foster an initiative to reform the business enabling environment in the country. We are working in multiple sector and multiple reform areas, including starting a business, paying taxes, trading across border, dealing with construction permits, and facilitating electricity connection, and also on the financial sector reform side, working on insolvency issues, working on corporate governance, and also working on, we work with the authority to facilitate the introduction of driver's liability insurance coming into place at the beginning of October. In all of this area, the idea is to make it easier for business to operate in Mongolia, to create the environment for to take away excessive bureaucracy and unnecessary regulatory requirement for the private sector, and allow for a much better environment where small, medium, and large firms can operate in this environment.